People often like to bring up Japan and the Japanese market for manga as an example of where the US market is headed, but there's a couple significant differences that people ought to remember. I'll explain. Hey everybody, it's Perch. Thanks for listening. Most of all, I really appreciate the subscriber growth that's come off this channel. It's impressive, it's humbling, it's all of those things. I'm very thankful. If you're listening to this, you haven't subscribed, I would love a subscription here. I'm not pushing for monetization. I'm just interested in understanding who this audience is and getting some content out. So I really appreciate, also, I'm more than subscription, I appreciate suggestions for future videos. I do get to them. Sometimes it takes quite a while because I record these things, many cases far in advance of when they air, which I hear that the YouTube algorithm, then when I upload and set them to release on a certain day, it downgrades the search result. I don't, I again, okay. I should do better by that, but more important for me is just to get a good stream of videos out and talk about topics that I want to talk about, and hopefully you want to listen to. So thank you very much for the attention and the support over the last several months. Um, Talking about Japan and that market, it's a market that a lot of people do not understand, and I think they a lot of people they get, say, 10% of the market understood, and then they kind of give up. They stop at that point and they just assume they're an expert and they kind of move on. But understanding any culture, whether it's Japanese or one of the European cultures or South American culture, it's not something you can just understand in 5 minutes. Just as much as if you're trying to explain to someone the nuance of difference between, say, somebody who lives in New York versus somebody who lives in Massachusetts. If you live in Texas, you probably think both of those regions are about the same thing. But if you go to New York or Massachusetts, they'll be happy to explain to you at length all the massive differences in those two markets. And so understanding a culture is not trivial. And also understanding the manga and society culture of how comics are consumed is very different from how anime is consumed. And a lot of people equate those two as well. They assume that anime equals manga and they're one and the same, and the audience is the same, and the consumption is the same, and that's also not true. So let me kind of clear up a couple, like I'd say the top three misconceptions about Japan that might be interesting for you. The first, that the Japanese all are behind digital, that everything is digital in Japan, and the market converted away from the giant phone book sized manga years and years ago, decades ago, and they're living in a completely digital world. Well, this is patently false on every possible level. Japan has plenty of printed material out there. Yes, digital is actually quite strong in Japan. There's a lot of consumption around digital, and there's a reason for this. Japanese or Japan and the Japanese are what's considered a commuter culture. Most people do not have a car. Most people take the train system, which is both frightening if you've been there, if you've never been there and you're seeing it for the first time, or absolutely brilliant if you spent more than a week in Japan and you figure out the rail system and you discuss, you're basically asking yourself, why isn't every place like this? Because you can get anywhere you want on a rail system that is on time, clean, neat, precise, and pretty amazing. And so when you're living in a commuter society where you don't have to drive, then it opens up the door to reading a lot more content. You need to do that. And in the subway system, you don't always have strong Wi-Fi. Definitely you have pretty good network connection, but there's also a cultural kind of bias to not have a lot of kind of videos and TV and distracting things on your phone. And people still do it. I guess what I'm saying here is that if you've got a phone or a tablet and you're sitting there and you're like watching TV for yourself and you're creating a distraction for the people around you, it's kind of frowned upon. I think Japanese culture is very much be respectful to the people around you. And when you're on the train, depending on what time of day you're on the train, you could be packed in, like literally like sardines. And so the idea of watching a movie while packed in is both difficult for you to do and also disrespectful to the people around you. So things like reading manga and those kinds of stories, that kind of content is very popular. It's why you'll also see a lot of very small sized books and other things, so people can very easily and quickly carry their reading material with them, walk onto the train, and read. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, wait a minute, what about those giant, again, phone book sized manga things that you see in movies, or maybe you've seen on a website somewhere? Well, those still exist, certainly. But the I guess the portability of manga in smaller books has risen quite a bit over the last 15 years. And you've seen a lot smaller size designs and content for people to consume. And yes, digital as well. So digital has done very well in Japan because it fits the market, but it hasn't taken out traditional print. There's a lot of stores that carry manga. And in fact, if you go to any kind of, I don't know, pop culture media type store where they have DVDs, CDs, games, and content like that. If you go into Shibuya, Shinjuku, not so much Harajuku, there's a few, but Akihabara, these kinds of neighborhoods throughout Tokyo, you will find dozens and dozens of stores. I mean, I think you can go to Shibuya Square. That's that's a place in the city of Shibuya that you often see in movies. It looks a little bit like Times Square, where you have like 5 rows, you have a million kind of screens up on the buildings and everything. It's a common filming location. Anyway, you could stand in the middle of that thing and just throw a rock in any direction and probably hit one of these stores. And they always have, or I think nearly all of them, if not all of them, have a basement or one of the floors. The basement is often reserved for truly the dirtiest porn you've ever seen in your life. In some case, I guess that's more Akihabara, but they all have, a floor or 2 floors of manga. And when I say a floor, I mean, picture a pretty large, store, and it is packed with thousands and thousands and thousands of books, manga books, of every possible type. And in fact, if you go in there for the first time, your brain starts to just shut off. You don't even know where to look or where to go. And so that business is healthy. And if you go there, there are lots of people standing there looking at the books, buying books, browsing the shelves. It's popular, and that's not going away anytime soon. It hasn't really decreased in popularity any. It's doing just fine. So even though digital is a thing and is coming up, people still buy the books. Now you might ask yourself, well, why? There's a bunch of reasons. Sometimes it's for collector purposes. Sometimes it's because there's a lot of crafts and things going on, so they're taking these out and they're putting it. Sometimes it's just practicality. They want something to read on the train. They prefer paper. Lots of people still prefer paper there, and they just don't want to run their phone's battery out while they're reading manga. I mean, or they're sampling manga on a digital device, and then if they like it, they'll pick up the series or start collecting in paper. There's lots of reasons there. There's also a big turnover of manga where you've bought something and then you're taking it in either to a used bookstore, you're getting rid of it, or you're trading it or passing it around. It's a healthy business there because space is limited in people's homes, and so they don't have 50 long boxes full of comics. They'll have the things they like, and then they'll tend to trade and pass it around and hand off. But paper manga is healthy and well, and for some reason, when people are talking about the major digital revolution in Japan, they always kind of forget about that there are literally, you can walk into thousand, it's got to be 1,000+ stores throughout Tokyo that service these books, service this manga. So that was a long one. The second I'll be a little quicker with these other two. The second big misconception I think people have about Japan and that market is simply that the whole manga lifestyle, or the people who are consuming manga or anime, are the otaku, or the super nerdy, geeky kind of individuals. And there you'll find that's not true at all either. You'll have all types of people, all ages, buying manga. While it's true, there's been over the top kind of stereotypes of otaku or super nerdy, kind of usually in Japanese manga, the really pimply, creepy kid who's like, over the top into cosplay, or heroes, knows everything, perverted kind of behavior. Yes, that's a stereotype, but the reality is lots of people buy manga. And the other thing about Japanese manga is they do a very good job, I would say, of having content to meet all kinds of markets. There's content for men, women, young girls, young boys, older people. There's superhero manga, there's romance manga. Definitely, there's different streaks of popularity where you'll see a manga or a particular manga type will get popular, and so you'll see a bunch of clones and other things off of it. But you have a healthy, you know, lots of segments of manga for pretty much every demographic being served. And one thing that the Japanese manga market does, I think, a lot smarter than the Western market is when they are trying to hit a new market or when something does become popular to one demographic, they don't immediately try and transform the manga that's working quite well for, say, young boys into suddenly romance fiction. They keep that existing manga going. Sometimes it succeeds, sometimes it fails, but that's based on its own demographic market coming or going. They don't try and warp one piece of manga into another just because there's a popularity trend going on. Just as a general rule of thumb. The last kind of misconception I'd say about the Japanese manga market and where it's very different from the West and from the U.S. is just simply, again, I think kind of the collector aspect to it. I think that there is a much kind of, I would say, bigger connection, if you will, between toys and figures and manga and anime and games and media today and all the rest. There's a better kind of synergy, if you will, between all of those different elements. So if you're going to pick up, a manga, they don't let the movie and the manga or the toys and the movie and the manga, they don't let those things get separated from each other. They keep them much more consistent, much more aligned. They try and do a much better job of keeping the brand consistent. And part of that is there's a quality element to it where they believe that if, to the market, if you fall in love with, a particular, manga, then the translation of that manga, the representation of it is of high value. So you need to keep that true, you need to keep it consistent, and you need to, honor kind of the audience that basically came to the table. It's not to say things don't change somewhat in translation, they do. And there's a lot of interesting debates about when kind of the anime deviates from the manga or vice versa, and very spirited debates. But by contrast, if you were to say, take, Video Girl I, the manga, versus Video Girl I, the OVA or the movie, there's big differences between the two, and there's a hearty disagreement about choices that were made for the anime for the film, both as opposed to what was in the manga. But if you were to compare, say, that to Civil War the comic versus Civil War the movie, I mean it would be laughable. It's not even the differences in how Western media is translated is vast, and in Japan media it's very small. It's like in Video Girl Eye, it's like, well, we're going to modify the personality of the character to have her be a little bit more into basketball instead of soccer. And in the Western equivalent will be, we're going to have the main character, this young female kind of character, we're going to have her be an 80-year-old man. That's like the difference there. And I think I hear that said quite a bit in Western side about, well, the manga is very different from the anime, and it's they don't they allow their two different markets to breathe and be their own thing. Not really. They keep pretty tight lid on it. The Japanese market, I mean, and then there's 500 million other kind of unique, smaller differences between the Western market and the manga market. But in general, it is a very different market from the West. A lot of what worked over in Japan would not work in the U.S. whatsoever. It's just a very different culture. It's a very different style of consumption and reading and what people are into. The business economics are just tremendously different from they are in the West. And so you can't compare them. The best thing you can do is just try and enjoy one and enjoy the other if you can, or if you like one over the other, enjoy the one you like and don't enjoy the one you don't like, and kind of leave it at that, because it's there's just not a world where we can take lessons from what worked in Japan and apply them carte blanche to the U.S. That's not going to happen, and people who are trying to do that are being ridiculous. It's a different region, different culture, different dynamics. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. There's a lot more to say on the subject, so if people like it, they want to learn more, please put comments in the comments below, and I'll go into a lot greater depth. But I think as a general intro, I was trying to keep this at 10 minutes, and we went to 15, so that's not good. But like, subscribe if you wouldn't mind. Let me know if you want to see more, hear more. Happy to go into it. If there's a particular part you'd like me to explain further, happy to do that too. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, and thank you for listening.